So here we are at part 6. Hopefully you now know how long a fursuit head takes to build. This one has hair, so I'm going to be making that in this part. As you can see, I'm drafting out the, I was going to say fringe, but Americans call it bangs, so I should probably call it that. Drafting that out at the minute. Just do that on standard printer paper fresh. You can use any type of paper, and then trace it onto the fur. I've traced the top visible part first just to make sure it all sort of matches up, and now I'm going to flip the pattern piece and make another piece to sew backwards onto it, so it's, you know, it doesn't have backing on one side. Same method as cutting out the fur pieces for the face. Draw on the back, cut with a craft knife or utility knife or whatever. I've pinned all of the ends of the fur sort of spikes, shall I say. Just helps keep it all straight, really. You don't want to get to sew the end, you know, the tip of a spike, just to find that one side is shorter than the other. So it really helps at this point to pin those pieces. Sewing the tips is very tricky because it's such a small, tight space. Just make sure you sew it very, very tightly. I think I used the whip stitch again. Possibly could have done with a blanket stitch, but a whip stitch, I've never had problems with a whip stitch, so that's okay. You can also machine sew this, but again I like to hand sew small fiddly bits, which is a nightmare because it makes everything take a lot longer, but I just think it's a lot neater and it's a lot easier to get that kind of accuracy that you need on such small, delicate pieces with odd shapes. Sometimes you're on a roll with sewing and you just get the entire row done, and then the next one it's just a nightmare and you're constantly tucking fur under, and you're constantly going back over stitches because they didn't look strong enough. Again, thread colour doesn't matter because the fur is going to remain long. Obviously when you get to the end, leave an opening because you'll want to turn it back the right way, then you can sew the back part by hand, you know, the other way round using a ladder stitch, or, you know, you could probably even glue it depending on what you're doing with the next piece of fur, or sew the next piece of fur on. It just depends on personal preference. I use the end of a pair of scissors to help me turn out the points. If the scissors go through the point, they're not strong enough, obviously. The scissors aren't sharp on the end, they're rounded, so that's good. I've got to turn on my glue gun, which means now I have to wait. So I'm using pennies. These are actually cents. I'm going to be putting 2 inside the end of each spike of hair. That's going to help weight it down to give it a bit more bounce, and, you know, bring the fringe over the face a lot more as opposed to it just sticking outwards. I tried it with 1 penny, didn't like it, so I ended up putting 2 in each. Just adding a bit of fur to go down the sides of the ears to act as hair. Exactly the same process. Drafted out the pattern on paper, cut out 2 pieces, 1 flipped, sewing them back to front, and then I'll turn them the right way out. I'll eventually be making 2 of these, 1 for each side, but I don't make the other one until later. Here you can see me gluing the pennies onto the same side of the fur. Basically just put a bit of glue down, put the penny on top, and then glue around the edges. I would recommend making a little pouch for the penny and then gluing or sewing that in, but for what it is, I don't really need to. It'll stay there perfectly fine. If one does come loose, it still acts as weighing down the little spike of hair, so in this particular instance it doesn't make a difference because it's got nowhere else for the penny to go if it does fall off. Trim down the fur really, really short where you're going to glue the hair, and trim down the hair really short as well. When you cover it in glue, saturate the fur down to the backing. You want to make sure you get the backing, not just the fur. Where you've trimmed the fur, it doesn't have to be neat at all because it'll all be glued together. Just make sure that you're only trimming bits that will be glued together, and not bits that you'll be able to see. And then just press the pieces together, hold them nice and tight, rub them down. Oh, I'm on eyebrows now. Trim the fur down where the eyebrows are going, exactly the same way. Just make sure you don't trim what will be visible, only trim what's going to be under the eyebrows. I made these eyebrows prior to the video for a different project, but I ended up using them here, which I do apologise I couldn't show you, but it's basically just the plastic from the eyes and then covered in felt this time. I used to use fleece a lot, but I think felt has... I don't know, fleece just makes it look more like a cuddly toy. Felt has a bit more of a different texture. I use fleece for the inside of my mouths and ears all the time, but for a couple of different things I use felt now. I'm sewing up the back of the hair with a ladder stitch, so you don't see it. That's the reason in a nutshell. You don't see the stitching, but obviously you could turn it inside out. Trimming the fur down nice and short. By nice and short, I mean very, very, very short. And I've also trimmed a little bit between the spikes of the hair in this video, just so they're a little bit more defined. I feel like you can't really tell they're individual spikes if you don't sort of just trim between them slightly. But again, you've got to be very careful with how much you trim. Don't trim too much off, don't make it jagged, because it would just be visible. You just have to blend it nicely in with the rest of the hair. Now cut the hair on the top of the head, which is what you'll be gluing the hair to. Cut the fur on the top of the head even. I'm confusing myself and you with the words now. I haven't glued the back of the fur down because I wasn't sure if I was going to glue it or sew it. I might have just sewed the hair directly to it. So I glued that down, trimmed it all up nice and neat, and glued the hair on much the same way as I glued that little sideburny bit. Started from the back, worked my way forward, then I could still trim more fur if I needed to. To do the back of the head, I'm going to make a separate pattern. I could have taped it up from earlier and kept that piece, but I don't really know what I did with the pattern pieces. I kind of lost them, which isn't good, because I did say make sure you keep them until the very end of your project, just in case. In case you make any mistakes at all, you've always got the pattern to recut the exact same piece of fur. So here I'm just pinning on the printer paper. Drawing and cutting as necessary. Obviously you can use tape like before, I just didn't. I also wasn't happy with the way I was going to do the hair there, so I just cut the hair off and I'm going to sew individual pieces and stick them on separately. Cut the piece out in the fur. All of the fur I've used, by the way, is you know, the standard DF luxury shag fur, 1.5 inch pile. I order it from fabric.com. It's got good international shipping, which ships within you receive it within 4 days of placing the order. It's fantastic. When sewing, gluing the edges of fur, this is the problem with sewing seams on the face. You have to be very, very careful to glue the pieces together perfectly. So there's no visible glue, so there's no visible foam. It's very difficult. Because the fur is long back there, it sort of worked okay. So now I'm cutting and sewing the little triangle smiley bits for the face. Again, just cut the fur down really, really short with a pair of scissors so the glue will stick to the backing, not just the fur. And the pieces are sort of just cut by eye, really. Just sort of taking a little look at the shape I want and cut them by eye. I'm making the teeth now, which I make out of fleece. I can't really explain to you how I make those, because I just fold over 2 outside edges and glue them, and then fold it in half and glue it again, and then cut the tooth shape. A little bit complicated. I don't like sewing it because it's so small, and I don't see the point. It's so small and tight, and you can just make the glue not visible with the way you do it. Gluing in the tongue that I made earlier, you just want to glue along the back, down the middle, and glue the front of the tongue to the back of the teeth, just so it doesn't pull up and you see unsightly glue marks. That means you can add more glue to the teeth and secure them in a lot stronger. I also cut the teeth on an angle so they can fit on the edge of the lip as opposed to directly in the mouth, because else they'll be too close together. Drafting a little piece for the side here. I didn't use the same piece. Again, I don't know why, because I knew I had it and I knew where it was this time. I just decided to make a different one. Wasn't happy with some of the trimming, go back and trim again. There's lots and lots of just, oh wait, I've just noticed this bit's not quite right, I'll go and fix that. That's going to happen a lot. The little smiley pieces, you just basically cover them in glue and put them in. Make sure you press them in firmly so they glue in strongly. I didn't actually see me glue them in. Make sure none of the glue's visible. Again, you can paint the edges if there is a little bit of glue visible. I will be painting the edges anyway. Here I am cutting the side pieces for the hair. Hair's not easy. This is the first time I think I've done it effectively using this method. Ideally I'd use longer fur, but I can't actually find any longer pile fur in the bright red that I need. Lots of care on the tips. Also, all of the pennies are on the underside of the fur pieces. As they're sort of just 2 pieces sewn together, I always put the pennies on the lower one so that it actually pulls it down. I don't really want to put it on the top one in case it falls too flat. Again, trim where you're going to glue very, very closely. Just be careful not to trim too much. You'll want to keep holding the bit you're gluing up to the head and, you know, just check the fit over and over again. Bit of texting while I hold the glue. Holding glue is boring and takes forever. Back to the back of the head. Yeah, I do just sort of dot in and out of what I'm doing. I go from one thing to the other far too quickly. Drafting out the pattern on paper for the little spikes at the back of the head. I do 3 main ones and then 2 on each side. Marker pens are fine, you won't see them through the fur. The thread colour doesn't matter. There's not much I can say about any of this, really. It's all just repetition of what I've done before now. I leave the entire end open that I'm going to be sewing to the red fur that's already on the head, and then I sew all of that in one go. Have a lot of white thread. Might as well use that. You won't see it. And now I cut out the 2 side pieces. I didn't actually pattern these, I just sort of drew them, cut them and sewed them. They're only small. They don't require too much precision. Exactly the same sewing technique. There's very few basic stitches you'll need to know with fursuit building. And now for the other side. The side you leave open before you turn it inside out is the side that you'll be sewing or gluing to the head. Sewing on the hair directly to the hair at the back of the head. Again, right sides together. Sewing up the open ends of the little triangles of fur for the side. Trimming the fur down and gluing them together. Now gluing the rest of the hair back on. Again, seams are awkward, you've got to be very careful. Well, I hope you enjoyed this part, and I hope to see you during the next part. Thank you very much.